So hi everybody, Danny and I are back together here at the Church Guy and the Addict. Danny, how are you doing today, buddy?
Good, my friend. It's a beautiful day today. And yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. So Danny, last time we did our video together, we talked about the purpose and the reason why we were doing this. And it was so the church people could help people suffering with addictions be more successful. And we had talked about some of the frustrations that you and I have had, me as a church guy, you as an addict, um, and the frustrations that both of us have had with working, like you working with church people and me church working with people struggling with addictions, not understanding the terminology, not understanding, when I'm being conned, when I'm being lied to, all those sorts of things. And you've seen frustrations on your side of it. So, what are some of the issues that you've seen over the years with church people and addicts? Some of the problems.
Well, let me just say this before we get there. Is one of my devotions that I read today spoke of, like how we've helped many people who are in recovery,
Yeah.
whether addicts or even church people. But you help a lot of people. At least I do anyway, and yourself too. But I mean, you help people, and you help them for a month and they don't get it, and then they go back out, or you help them for a year or two and they don't get it. And sometimes you feel like you're wasting your time. And the beautiful part of this devotion that I read today said that, thank God that my sponsor helps me to have more of a heart than a brain, because our
Mm,
brain say give up and let's run, and the heart says, well, let's give it another kick at the can. Hopefully so and so is ready to get well, be
right,
it the church person or the person in recovery.
right. Well, why don't we take a few minutes, Danny, and just share like what your credentials are as an addict and what my credentials are as a church guy.
Okay, well, for myself, by the grace of God, thank God that I'm at 16 and a half years, almost 17 in August. And then once again, that's by the grace of God. And I was heavily addicted to both drugs and alcohol. At the end of my rope, I was what they would call someone with no fixed address for 2 years. And, I was an IV user, as well as a daily, if not every hour, if not half hour, anyway, alcohol user. And so by the grace of God, and the treatment centers, and good people like the church guy across the camera here. But God has put some beautiful people in my life to help me recover from this awful, dreaded disease that I've seen many people die from. And unfortunately, I have a death count, which keeps me going, whether it's going to more meetings or Zoom meetings as we have today because of the virus. But it's at 187 people. And a few of those people are my own family members as well. So it
100,
hits close,
187 people, the what, Danny?
who have died due to the direct result of alcohol and or drugs, or both.
Hmm. That's interesting because just since you and I last met, we both had somebody die from the disease.
That's correct.
A good friend of mine was murdered out in Kamloops, and he had been clean and sober for about 2 years actually, and then he went back out and found out that he was stabbed to death at a party just early March. And I think you had a death from addiction as well. What
I
was that like?
did. And for myself, 16 and a half years ago, I was in a treatment facility, and one of the guys I was in there with, unfortunately, passed away, direct result of drugs and alcohol.
Mm.
And so, it's only been probably like a month and a half, maybe, since our last recording.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I mean.
and,
In the
and
last, well, my friend died March the 29th because it was the day before my birthday, so I'll remember it because I woke up on the day after my birthday actually, and heard the news. So it's basically a couple of months ago. But 186 people, you said, Danny, or 180?
37.
187. So you're actually keeping track of people that you're losing to this disease or that have lost to this disease.
Exactly, because when life gets well, as it is today, considering, we forget, especially those in recovery, because we get things back like jobs and family and
Mm.
material stuff, and have the safe place to sleep at night. I was just talking to a friend of mine just the other day who got a bed, and it means so much. And for myself, just a safe place to sleep at night, because for 2 years I didn't have a safe place to sleep at night. So I try to always stay grateful for that. It's very important for me, and just to savor what most people take for granted.
So Danny, you're obviously credentialed as an addict. There's no question about that. How did you come into sort of relationship with church people?
Well, that's a great question, Don. The treatment center I was at, maybe 500 feet up the road, there was a church.
Mm.
And at this church is where we had AA meetings and what have you. And then there was one day where I was finishing an AA meeting, and someone happened to be celebrating, and there was cake, because there's normally cake after a celebration. And one of the minister, who's got a sweet tooth, saw me eating the cake, and we started talking. And I'll say it as honestly as I can, I was not very friendly.
Mm.
uh, because the God that I was brought up with was a God that kept score. And this minister and we struck up a conversation, and I remember saying, "Listen, Father," and I actually frightened him when we were speaking, because I was so angry with organized religion and God Himself, because my dad had died when I was young, and of course, the life that I was leading, I blamed God, until I realized in doing the steps that there were so many times that God had protected me rather than harmed me. And it was me who put myself in all these different situations, with guns to my head, and I'm not the guy holding the trigger. So, all these times that God had protected me, I learned through the steps that, I was saved, and I believe, and part of the program is the 12 step is giving back. So for me, it's the only way I can keep what I have done is by giving it away. And the church people, I was just with a lady today who watched me from day one. And, she says it's remarkable how much of a human being, like how much of a change that as a human being you've become since day one, since the day she met me. Because to me, life today, Don, isn't about Danny, it's about others and where I can serve and help, much like you do, Don.
So Danny, when you say the program, you're talking about AA?
I am. I am. Yeah. Even
So
though I'm
that's,
duly addicted, I do go to AA. That's where I primarily go, only because of the fact that, recovery started with Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's many different 12-step groups after that. But, in AA, for instance, the guy who ran that treatment center I was in, he's going to be celebrating 58 years of sobriety. So there's a lot of longevity in terms of people who are sober and stay sober.
well, some of the things we're going to be talking about, Danny, over the next little while with these chats, is we're going to be talking about the conflict that church people have with AA. And I think it's more of a misunderstanding than a conflict. Over the years, because you and I have been in a friendship, and we've done interventions, to try to help people recover. We've tracked alongside people who are in recovery, and there's always this tension between Alcoholics Anonymous and the church person, at least in my view. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not the case everywhere, but that's one of the things that I really feel that where me as a church guy needs help understanding the addict, understanding, my actions have consequences in your life. And sometimes, I have the wrong motives. Sometimes I do the wrong things. Sometimes I believe you when I shouldn't. I'm not talking about you in particular, but I'm talking about the addict.
But maybe this
Um,
is a great time for you to qualify, Don. Why are you doing
yeah,
this?
yeah. So I'm a church guy, and hence the name of our chat is the Church Guy and the Addict. But as a church guy, probably because of my background, so I'm not your normal church guy. Although I was raised in a Christian family, I was quite rebellious as a teenager and got away from God and got involved in, I mean, drugs and alcohol, but I never was addicted. But I was addicted to adrenaline, and so I actually became a law enforcement officer, and then got involved in organized crime in Montreal, and wound up doing some time in Bordeaux prison, and then came back to my faith. My father was a minister, and I came back to faith in God and started attending church again, and so became a church guy again. But because of my background, probably because of my testimony, um, um, addicts are attracted to my story because I share it in churches in different places, and they know that I can relate to them, to a certain degree. So I've been involved with helping a lot of addicts over the years in my church life, and that's how you and I became acquainted. Actually, you invited me to share it at one of your Celebrate Life services, and then we became fast friends, and we've been friends for a long time. But then, as we tracked with different people with addictions who are suffering with addictions, I found out how little I actually knew about the disease, whether it even was a disease. I mean, these are some of the things that I think you and I should be talking about over the next in our next videos. And so I began to realize that some of the mistakes that I was making with people was actually causing them to use, or was
Mm,
enabling them to use.
right.
And so you and I, a number of years ago, actually did a training session for church people to help them understand, what people are dealing with in addictions and how they could be more helpful. And so that's really how this is all transpired. So although I'm not your typical church guy, I've been in the church long enough to certainly wear the hat of the church guy. And because I'm not an alcoholic or an addict, um, I really don't understand the disease the way you do. And so I've felt for a number of years now that if we could do something like this that would help probably more the church person. I think the church guy needs more help than I mean, you guys have AA, you have Al-Anon, you have some great tools in your toolbox. You've got your 12 steps. You've got the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're right there. And so I just think that we need to have some conversations that are frank and that are to the point about, like, if I'm going to help somebody like Danny recover, how am I going to be more successful?
Mm,
What am I missing that is going to be helpful to you in your recovery and others?
right. And something we've spoken about, which is your big book
Yeah.
and the problems with that, So maybe you can share for a few minutes on something like that, like your big book versus my big book. But the neatest part of this is now that you've been reading my big book, if you will, you realize it's full of God in that book, and it's full of doing God's will, and how, like, before we knock somebody, we must realize that we're all God's children, right? So it's so much like your book. But the church people think, well, if you
Yeah.
just had God, then don't worry about it, you're okay, you know.
Well, that was probably one of my biggest misconceptions about Alcoholics Anonymous, was that I really didn't realize that it was a spiritual program. I think you've told me that about 1,000 times, but until I started reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't really understand how the whole foundation of AA is Christian based and
On the Beatitudes.
pardon me,
On the Beatitudes.
is based on the Beatitudes. Yeah. And so, I mean, just from that point alone, I mean, I think that's a conversation maybe for next time.
Sure.
But I think that certainly is an example of a misunderstanding between the church guy and the addict.
Mm.
Is, you know, in the past, I would tell people, well, let's see, if you got a choice between going to church on Sunday morning or going to an AA meeting, I'd encourage the person to go to church. You'd encourage the guy to go to an AA meeting. And I've now, come to the understanding that it's important to point people to to AA, to a program that's going to help them, and that the spiritual element of it is the foundation still, um, but that they need to be surrounded by people who understand what it is that they're going through.
Exactly.
I mean, I think the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says in probably the first few pages, it's one alcoholic helping another alcoholic.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So already the church guy trying to help the addict is flawed from the beginning.
Hmm. Hmm. And I don't go to church because I'm afraid to go to hell, Don. I've already been there. I go to church to enrich my spirituality, you know?
Yeah. So I think over the next number of weeks, Danny, you and I are going to be talking about this subject. Today, I just wanted to clarify. I think, well, we wanted to clarify. We talked about it beforehand. This is not an interview. This is a conversation between me and you. And but I just want people to understand, or I guess we want people to understand that this is a really big subject. It's not, it's not clear cut.
No.
Every alcoholic has a different personality. There's some characteristics and traits that are like in common. And church people, every church person has a different background and a different understanding of spiritual things, and also what their intentions are towards helping somebody with an addiction. And I think that the only way to really help, or one way to really help, is to talk these things through. So you've got a
Exactly.
guy like me who is naive to alcohol and drugs, um, but I understand very well the personality of a church person and some of the misconceptions that we have. So it's a chance for us to talk those things out, and really with the intention of helping the church guy become more equipped, have more tools in his toolbox, in order to be able to help the addict who is out there a lot of times reaching out to church people, as you were when you were first in recovery and you met the pastor guy.
Yeah. And may I add too, Don, that, when I was when I started, I would say reattending church, because I did as a young fellow too.
Mm.
Um, there was a lot of, a nice way to say it. I would say there was a lot of anger I had towards God. And one thing I had realized is, no matter what, God loves me. God has always been there for me, even though I turned my back on him. But my biggest thing is I thought, because of all the bad things that I have done, I'd never make it to heaven. So in my case, I was willing to go to church and meet church people, but not to con them, not to get, and we can talk about that later because you've got a wonderful story about that. But it was a sincere desire to be a better human being for myself. And I wasn't looking to con people. But, most addicts, well, church people, as we know, are great victims, if you will, because, they always say, well, what would Jesus do?
Mm.
You know, and so financially or materially or even just a place to live, people that are in addiction, their job is to con people, to get what they want, even in when they're clean and sober. Like if you have a horse thief and you sober him up, he's still a horse thief. He's still stealing horses,
So
So
I mean, this is the exact type of thing that we need to talk more about, Danny, because you have the understanding of it, and I have the desire to learn, and I think other people do too. They really want to help, and it's not that we're trying to push church people together with addicts It's that it happens automatically because of a lot of AA meetings happen in church basements.
Mhm.
And so church people automatically enter into relationship with these people. And so, and they want to help them.
And can I just add one thing too, Don, if you don't mind? If you shake a family tree, a lot of us fall out. So it's helping church people help their own family as well, or being able to have the church person or the family member be able to get well, because that's our aim here, is to help church people and help those in recovery. That's our total aim for doing what we're doing today, and hopefully as time goes by, other days, and hopefully we can have people come and ask questions or whatever, and we could be of some help or some service, you know.
Yeah, well, just actually just to highlight that, Danny, if people do want to send in questions, they can email us at the Church Guy and the Addict at gmail.com. And
Right.
we'll be happy to take those questions and respond. So I'll let you go for today, Danny, but great chatting with you, and you take care, brother.
Likewise. You too, my friend. God bless.
Okay, God bless you.